Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for coming today. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Once I can figure out how to move my slides. There we go.
You don't want to use the mic, I don't know.
Can you guys hear me with this microphone so I don't have to hold it? Can you hear me there in the back of the room? I'll try to talk loud. Okay. Alrighty, welcome and thank you for coming today. My name is Christina Smith. I am a business analyst senior in the University Registrar Services. So a quick bit about me. I've been working at ASU for 26 years. I started in 1996 in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences as a front desk receptionist. So just proof that you can have small beginnings and end up in some really cool places here at ASU. While in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, I moved into various different positions, including class scheduling, enrollment reporting, coordinator of the College Standards Committee, and a lot of other responsibilities. I transitioned to my career as a business analyst in 2008 in the University Registrar Services. My undergraduate degree is a Bachelor of Science in Integrated Studies, which is a specialized degree through the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences that allows you to develop your own degree program. My particular focus was on researching, analyzing, and editing historical source documents, which, believe it or not, actually has some interesting correlations to some of the work that I do today. Okay, so our agenda today, we're going to talk about enrollment tracking resources. We're going to talk about some really key enrollment tracking concepts, and we're going to be diving deep into a lot of principles here that I think are really foundational to understanding how we do enrollment tracking in the registrar's office. And we'll also deep dive into a little bit of some key fields so you understand the background of how those fields are computed. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is enrollment tracking resources. So the first thing, if you weren't able to attend any of these sessions by other members of the RegTech team, I encourage you to look up the recordings for those. So Jennifer Hornsby did in RegTech enrollment and records data, as well as student profile data. And then Brady Hampton on my team also did Power Query, the building block for your enrollment tracking. If you look up the recordings from Data Conference 2021, you'll see that there is an enrollment tracking, a brief overview that was done by Rebecca Berkowitz on my team, and enrollment tracking, the secret ingredient, which was a presentation that I did. This presentation is kind of a direct follow-up to those presentations. And all of this kind of ties together in a really neat way. So these are wanted to make sure you were aware of those as resources to look at if you want some more information. So some other key places to find information about enrollment tracking. The first, of course, are in analytics reporting. And after you go into the enrollment records group and enrollment tracking reports, you'll find the reports that we actually have available for tracking enrollment. There's links on that page as well that you may not have discovered yet. And so I encourage you to snoop around a little bit and find those links on that page. There's an information session from a recording back in 2021 that was done by Kristen Kennedy, Jennifer Hornsby, and myself that kind of gave a deep dive, a lot of information about enrollment tracking that's really helpful. There's also a link to enrollment tracking data set information. And so we have data sets off of the actual workflows that not only are used to create the reports that we have on this page, but that you can also access yourself to create your own reports. And so the Brady's session yesterday was specifically about showing you how to use Power Query to be able to do that. And what I'm giving you is a little bit more background information that you'll need to be able to better utilize those data sets. The data set information page also has links to a quick reference guide for the enrollment tracking data sets. So I encourage you to check that out. There's also a step-by-step instructions for connecting the enrollment tracking databases to Power Query and Excel. And so if you prefer a written format over the video, that is available to you as well. So speaking of those data sets, these are the enrollment tracking tables and data sets that are available for you to create your own enrollment tracking reports from. And so there's two places that you have access to do that. If you're comfortable building your own queries, you can go under the BI desktop and use the tools there and use the AUDB tables. And so, especially if you're trying to get a list like down to the EMPL ID level to see what students are being counted, that's probably the better way to do that. You can also use Excel and Power Query. So if you don't use the BI desktop regularly, you can use Excel and Power Query connected to one of the CSV files to create your own report as well. We specifically created the summary versions of the reports that Brady talked about yesterday as a summarized and quicker running data set. So that you can, but you want to use that for making aggregated reports. So if you're wanting to drill down to the EMPL ID level, those won't work for you. But if you're trying to get a regularly aggregated report that you want to be able to refresh quickly, those are going to be a good place to start. So these all are the same data sets as well that are used in the enrollment tracking reports. So again. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the concepts. So the first thing I want to talk about specifically in relationship to the data sets that we were just talking about is the data granularity. And so anytime you're working with data, you always want to understand what the granularity is, especially when you're dealing with student data. Understanding why a row, the same student might be listed multiple times in a data set is really an important thing to understand when it comes to understanding what the table you're looking at or the data that you're looking at. So that's when you're learning something for the first time, that's always something you want to make sure that you dig into and figure out. The detail, current and comparison data sets. So we have two different types, and we'll talk about that, the difference between current and comparison a little bit more later. They have one row per student per term and per each class number, so every class that the students enrolled in, and if it exists, if the student's primary plan has a subplan, there's going to be, you're basically going to get two groups of the classes that the students enrolled in for that term. And so that's a very granular data set. And so it's definitely one that you're going to, if you don't care about some plans, you're going to want to be filtering to the primary plan flag to get rid of those extra extra rows. But if you want to be able to see the classes, then that's the data set you want to focus on. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. Now the enrollment tracking comparison, just the straight enrollment tracking, the comparison and current and the summary. So the ones that don't have detail at the name, those are, they have one row per student per term. And so that's your cleanest data set to just drill down to counting students are the non-detailed versions. But again, if you need to get to the class data and class funding, you're going to have to look at the detail. Alrighty, so our next concept is going to be time traveling data. This is one of my favorite ones to talk about. Hopefully you can have some fun with it. So what we're going to be looking at specifically here is the difference in the relationship between snapshot data and current data. So first, we'll talk about the snapshot tables first. There's 5 snapshot tables in the data warehouse used in our enrollment tracking comparison data sets. These data sets allow you to compare enrollment for like terms at the same point in time. And so by like terms, we're talking spring to spring, fall to fall, summer to summer. If you're needing to look at a group of like fall, spring, and summer or something like that, where you're looking at something through the whole academic year, these data sets are going to do that for you. So again, just something to know about. So these are the key snapshot tables that we use. Student profile major by term snapshot, student profile by term, which has a lot of the class funding and the state reported data and such in there. The student enrollment snapshot and the class snapshot, and then the person snapshot. And so these are all used at different points, and you'll be able to see kind of how those are used. We're going to talk a little bit about the student profile snapshot TOC table as well. Let's talk about so the statement I said of comparing the same point in time. So let's talk about what point in time we're talking about comparing. Snapshot day and week are numbered in relation to the first day of the term. And so comparing spring 22 and spring 23, the first day of spring 23 is January 9th. The first day of spring 22 was January 10th. So that is always going to be week or day number 0. When you are looking before that point in time, they're going to be negative numbers. So day number -1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then when you get to day -7, that's week -7. And then when you're looking forward after that point in time, then we're positive numbers. And if anybody has questions, just raise your hand or holler at me, and I'm happy to pause and answer any questions as we go along here. So I want to deep dive into snapshots a little bit and really drill into what that data looks like when you're just looking at the snapshot days and weeks. We're going to use the snapshot TOC table to do that. So I have this little SQL query here. It's a real simple query. Don't let the SQL code scare you off. This is, we're focusing a little bit more on the concepts here than we are the coding, but we will talk about what this is doing. The SQL uses the TOC table and adds a row order column that allows us to compare the snapshots across terms. So it's really helpful to help us understand how these work. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is the beginning of the term. And so we're going to use spring 22 and spring 23 for our example here. What I've done here is I've put this data into a real simple pivot in Excel. By putting the data in this query, we can get some insights into how the snapshots work by doing this. The first point I want to look at is when the weekly snapshots start versus when the daily snapshots start. So you'll see that now, as of spring 23, we have started taking the daily snapshots as of the day after the first day of enrollment. In spring 22, that wasn't the case. The daily snapshots didn't start until day -62. So if from this point in time, you want to kind of look at the prior years to see where we were starting to count the daily or not, if you're wanting to look at daily data. So also note for spring 20 through 23, we don't have any dates after the current date when the query was run. And I know that the transcript is blocking that for you, but the point is that we can't really time travel to the future. And so when it comes to the current term in these snapshot tables, you're not going to see any snapshots for future points in time. So just be aware, it's time traveling. You can't go forward at that point. It doesn't exist until we've hit that date and time. You'll also notice a gap between day -87 and day -86. So these types of gaps are usually due to database maintenance. And we'll show some more examples about that and talk about that in a little bit. So now let's look at the other end of the spectrum at the end of the term. And so for this example, we're going to look at fall 20 and fall 21. And so you'll notice here that the daily snapshots end the day after the B session 21st day. So we stopped taking daily snapshots at that point in time, and now it's only weekly. And so if you wanted to fill in the gap at the end of the term, you might need to use current data to be able to do that with. Another thing that this query that I love to use it for is to help me see when snapshot dates were missed due to maintenance days or holidays. And so around the Christmas holidays is a perfect time to see that. It gets really messy during that point in time. So one of the anomalies that you'll see here is that, sorry, I need to find my exact notes here. So you'll see that there is one date when the day numbers don't match the week numbers. So right here. So week -2. So it's day -14, but it's day -13 here. So you're looking at that and going, what the heck happened with that? And I tell you what, this one has confused me so many times, it's not even funny. The key here is that we use the week numbers, not the day number of the snapshot to do the comparison. When a weekly snapshot is missed, the daily data for the next available snapshot is assigned the missing week number. And that's because the weekly ones take precedence. So that is what's happening there. And that's intentional. But again, like I said, if you're getting data on that date, you want to focus on the week, not the day number. Now that we understand the snapshot tables, probably a little more than we wanted to. I want to mention a key table that's used specifically in the enrollment tracking data sets to identify what day or week snapshot that we want to run the data for. And this is the enrollment comparison term table. This is actually developed by Stephen White, so kudos to him. The key thing to understand is that this table has logic built in that limits the snapshot day and week to the day's current values. This means that while enrollment tracking comparison data sets time travel to the extent that you can look at like the prior like term, they don't allow you to like travel back in time to an earlier snapshot day. So if you wanted to do this, you would have to use the actual snapshot tables and not the enrollment tracking data sets to be able to do that. So if you needed to run a query to see what the data looked like yesterday, you're not going to be able to use these data sets to do that with. We're done time traveling. So to wrap this up, let's talk about current enrollment tracking data. So current enrollment reports have enrollment data for the current date. Simple enough, right? This data comes from the data warehouse tables that are refreshed nightly. So it's, frozen data as of when it was saved overnight. So you can't time travel to see the enrollment totals from yesterday unless you happen to save off the report from yesterday. One advantage of the current data that the current data has over snapshot data, which I alluded to earlier, is that for time periods where there isn't a daily snapshot, you can still get the current reports and get that data, assuming there wasn't database maintenance that night before. So keep that in mind, but that's a great use case for current data. So now on to some other concepts. So let's talk about enrollment headcount based on a student's major. Most enrollment reporting is grouped by columns on the campus, college, or department, and these groupings are directly associated with the org structure tied to the student's major. So this has nothing to do with where they're taking their classes at or anything like that. It is only about where their major, what college or department their major is affiliated with. Note that the campus, I said that, moving on. So now, along with this, you need to also understand that most comparison reporting is based on the current term's organizational structure. What this means is that after a reorg, we apply the current term org structure to prior terms. So this helps us keep things, it makes it all apples to apples and just keeps things a lot more consistent. So for example, you'll see here that when comparing fall 2020 to fall 19, if we are in the fall 2020 year and comparing to 2019, the students that are in the sustainability major are going to be counted under the Global Futures College. Is basically all that means. And so even though they were technically in sustainability, there was a reorg that moved that college that was now a department into Global Futures. And that's the way we count them when we're comparing to that term. So that way everything lines up. Okay, so now we're going to dive into class funding. So a special category of enrollment reports are the class funding reports. These are not the same as instructor class funding. ResCheck, we don't work with instructor class funding, so please keep that in mind. We have headcount and SCH class funding reports. The key point to understand is that these reports are focused not on the student's major, but rather the classes the students are enrolled in. The classes, in addition to having attributes that identify them as state reported or not, also have attributes that identify the campus funding. All campus funding is identified as either Tempe, West, Poly, or downtown. And so even if the student's taking their classes at Havasu or some other location, the class funding is always going to be associated with one of those campuses. For fall and spring, we use values for campus class funding that come from the student profile table. And so these two examples on the left. For summer, we use values from the A-class table and their corresponding snapshot table. And then you see their corresponding snapshot tables here. So just understand that that comes from different places in the summertime. That's because summer is not state funded. So to further demonstrate the difference here between counting by the campus, doing head count by the campus of a student's major and class funding, note that the head count grand total on the state reported class funded, so these lower here, will match the head count when you're counting by the student's major. So the grand totals are always going to match because those numbers are consistent. However, the campus totals will not match. This is because students can be enrolled in classes with different campus funding values within the same term. And so again, it has nothing to do about the location of class. It has to do with who's paying the money, where the money's coming from. So whereas a student's major may be online or another location like Havasu, and so like Havasu would be counted here in other locations or online, the funding is still only going to be tied to one of the 4 main campuses. Okay. So one last example that demonstrates the difference between class funding and reporting by a student's major is the SAH and FTE reports. So looking at the academic career column, note that this refers to the academic career of the course, not the student. So you might have a graduate student who is enrolled in an undergraduate course. That means they're going to be counted in these undergraduate rows here. And vice versa. You might have an undergrad taking a grad course. They're going to be actually counted in these grad rows here. Okay, so that's it for the concepts. Any questions so far? Everybody keeping up, doing good? That's awesome. Okay, so now we're going to deep dive into some fields. So let's talk about state reported, which some of you are maybe used to hearing it called state funding. We call it state reported now. So enrollment reports will always specify if the data is based on state reported or non-state reported totals. To count a student as state reported, we first have to figure out if any of the classes that they are enrolled in are state reported classes. In some cases, regardless of the funding of the class, students in specific programs might be excluded from state reporting, and that's indicated in the student profile term table with the ASU exclude from state flag is equal to Y. So talking about this formula, so state reported, as the slide says, it's counted in 2 steps. So first we're looking at the class level. So when the statement is finding fall or spring terms, first the statement finds fall or spring terms. And then when the state funded flag of Y and the exclude from state funding is N. And then if the state funded is Y, or if it's summer, then they get a Y. Otherwise it'll get an N as being non-state reported. Summer, to clarify how summer's playing into this, it's always non-state reported, but that just means that we report all students in summer. But to keep the filters consistent for the actual reports, the way we use these reports, we make the value Y for summer. And so that means, so in summertime, you're not having to go flip your filters on your reports in order to keep up with that. So that just keeps that cleaner. So the second part of then going from class state reported to student state reported, when we find to find the student state reported value, we find the max class state reported value. So we're looking alphabetically at the Y or the N, and then we group by term and student, and this gives us our state reported field with either a Y or N value. And so that's how we get the class state reported down into the student. And so when you're thinking of our data sets, so for the comparison current data sets that don't have detail at the end, you're almost always going to want to use that the student state reported flag is equal to Y. It's very rare that you're going to be looking at non-state reported data, unless you have a specific program you're looking at, and you know who you are if that's the case. If you're looking at the detail tables and you're trying to drill into class data, then you're going to want to be focused on the class state reported flag. But keep in mind what we were talking about before with class funding, that what are you looking at? Are you looking at the student's major, or are you looking at the class and the class, career, department, college, all of that stuff. And all of those values are in those tables for you to identify the course data with. So the next field we're going to talk about is the campus of the student's majors. And so these are those reports where we're looking specifically at the student's major. So this is the current formula we use to find the campus of the student's major. Note that this is subject to change, things happen and stuff like that. So this is not ever, none of these things are ever set and granted. So this is timestamped as of right now. So the key fields, the campus from the student profile major term. So this is the campus that's shows in PeopleSoft in the student's program plan stack. This value can be changed by advisors and may or may not be the same campus as the student is reported under. And it may or may not be the same campus that they're actually taking classes on. The census table, CS Desker academic plan campus code identifies the correct reporting campus for the Tempe, West, Poly, downtown campuses based on the student's major. And so a lot of these majors might offer things on different campuses. That table helps pull it all into one campus so we're able to report more easily. So this formula is first looking at the campuses in the student profile major term that are not Tempe, West, Poly, or downtown, or where the campus census code is university or is null. Then, if the campus is GLBAC or Global Academy, we count them as online. Otherwise, the value will be the campus from the student profile major term. The last else statement finds value from the CS Desker academic plan code field for the rest of the students who don't meet the criteria above. So this would be the students with a campus value in the student profile major term of Tempe, West, Poly, or downtown, or a CS Desker or the campus code value of university or null. So the next field, and these fields that we're talking about, I'm focusing on the primary ones that we use as our rows and columns headers in these reports, by the way. So that's where these are all coming from and why I've chosen these fields specifically to focus on. And I am referring only to the student by major reports. So the next one is, it's abbreviated as RNI, but that's basically Arizona resident, non-Arizona resident, or international. First, the formula identifies students with a minority status not equal to X and a residency of RES, and those are Arizona residents. Then it looks at students who, again, don't have a minority status of X and a residency not is equal to no res. Those are non-Arizona residents. And then finally, those that do have a minority status of X is international. So to talk about this international concept, so international is the same definition used by institutional analysis, which is defined by the U.S. Department of Education. This definition stresses the temporary nature of the person's stay in the U.S. We have used this definition at ASU for as long as we have been reporting to IPEDS, which is at least back to the 1970s. Our registrar's reports, where we use the label international, we are using this same definition. On any report or data element on a report that is limited strictly to students with an F1 or J1 visa, we label it students with F1 or J1 visa rather than international. So these aren't necessarily interchangeable. Yes.
How does this relate to, or does it relate to students that come up with the citizenship outside of the US? Are those numbers comparable or no?
It depends on which visa code they have. And so I don't have in my notes the specific list of the visa codes that are included, but it depends on the visa code as to whether or not that's the case. So they could be a non-US citizen, but a certain visa code might take them out of this group.
Okay. So we should always use F.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's always based off of the definition that we want to be following when we are talking about international. And that's actually, that is not the last one. Sorry, I need to go back again. All right, NRC. So this is new, returning, and continuing And this is actually a combination. So this field in the enrollment tracking data sets is actually combining 3 different fields. So it's looking at the ASU grad undergrad code. So the thing to understand here is that we group law and grad into grad in this case to count them together. So it's not directly comparable to career. We also use the ASU new undergrad, and we use the ASU NRC Desker field from the student profile tables. So these are used to create some of the groupings that we broadly call NRC that we use in the row values for a lot of our reports. So this, again, this is the current formula that we use, and it is subject to change. It's a pretty straightforward case win statement. The main items of note is where we are using academic plan to identify new visiting university students, and where we're using degree to separate out the new degree seeking graduate students from the new non-degree graduates. Or from the new non-degree graduates. Okay. I see people looking at that, so I'm not going to change the slide yet. Any questions? Okay. So that is actually the last field that I have to cover. I'm going to leave that up there because I see people still staring at it. So any questions that anybody has? Yes?
What are some common use cases for?
Well, it's specifically designed for enrollment. And so if your goal is to, so let's say you're being asked to drill into a subset of students, but you want to match the numbers that show up on our enrollment tracking reports. This would be you're going to want to use these data sets to help you match those numbers. But the key is to make sure you're adding the correct filters where you need to and things like that to be able to, so like the state reported, those kind of things to drill down to what you need. That makes sense? Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Alrighty. Now so if you do have any questions, so you think of something later, you can reach us, my team at urcheck@asu.edu. I'm going to slide off of this. I can go back to it in a minute. So that's our email address that goes into our Salesforce queue. If I'm out, one of my other team members can likely help you with your question. If you have, and if we don't know the answer, we'll find who does. And I think that's it. All righty. Thank you, everybody.